Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 8, where we are looking at movement and play and how this supports well-being in the lives of young children. So, something that I want you to think about is why we're talking about play and movement is when children play, they're engaging with the environment as well as with other people, and they're engaging with their whole selves, with their physical self, with their emotional self, with their social self, with their communicative self, and with their creative self. And with their thinking self. So as educators, how do we support them to engage in the environment? Now, the reading for this week, chapter 3, I absolutely loved. And that talks and extends on your learning from last week, where you talked about fundamental movement skills, but it thinks of other ways in which we can consider the environment when we as educators are planning for the needs of young children. So the first one in the textbook we talk about is location. So looking at the location in this image, how does this location, what affordances does it provide for young children of all abilities and backgrounds to be involved in that movement and using that space for play? How is that location? You see that it's to the side of an area, that it's somewhere that's not in the middle where other children are going to run through what they're doing. So when you think about the location, you think about the activity that you want or you're planning to invite the children to. And with this, it looks as though they were making an outdoor dramatic play area for camping. But who knows, because we haven't asked the children. But thinking about that space and how they've got a teepee at the back, like you would with at a campsite or a tent, and that at the front, you've got all these different pieces of wood. There's plates and bowls you can see down here. So the children are getting to recreate a campsite area. And the location that they've selected to do this gives them the space. It gives them the materials are suited to that space. You may not want to bring in a whole lot of sticks and wood inside and put them on top of a carpet, but you're putting them on wood outside, so that can really stimulate their imagination. So with location, you're wanting to think about, is this space a good fit for inviting the children to play? Does it give them enough room? Does it create the right mood? Does it allow for children to play uninterrupted in the particular way that you're thinking that they might in this space, or that the children may have told you they'd like to play in that environment? Another important thing to consider when we're looking at creating the spaces is lighting. So in this image, you see that there's lots of natural light, that can come in so the children can sit on the floor and use that natural light to look at the different materials. They can lie on cushions and with that natural light, read books or play with puzzles. When you're thinking about babies and you're placing them on the floor, what lighting will you have overhead for them to look up at? Will it be lights that's filtered through different, and as you can see, I've got some light and reflection coming through the back right now. How will you use lighting to support children to see the materials that you want them to engage with, but to create a lovely sense of coziness and safety and play, and to look at their different attention? So are there going to be fairy lights on the ceiling babies might look up at? So lighting is really, really important. Think about overhead flashing fluorescent lights. I don't think that creates a nice environment for anybody. So that's a really important thing to consider in space. The other one that you want to think about is surfaces. And I love in this image that there's all sorts of different surfaces, because the surfaces also act, and you'll hear this a lot when we're talking about early childhood education, as the environment as the third teacher. How does the surfaces, how do the resources in this setting teach the children? So in the first picture, you've got a whole lot of buckets upside down. That invites children to practice balance, to step, they're quite light. They're all connected by threads, so children could make them closer together or they can move them apart. Think about the grass surface on either side. That's a relatively soft surface. So that's one that the children, if they fall or tip over as they're balancing, is not going to hurt them. It's not gravel, it's not cement. And then in the background, you've got some other soft mattresses and cushions. Again, this environment invites children to feel safe and to practice their balance. They might be practicing on the mats how to do somersaults if they're a little bit older, or to roll. Or you might put babies on their bellies out so that they feel that they can lie on something safe and not eat the grass. So it's those things you want to think about. In this picture, we've got a ladder. Now that's an invitation to climb. But again, you see it's very low to the ground. It's not a huge ladder up like that where a child could fall. So that surface is inviting the child to practice their crossover movement, to practice climbing. And again, in this picture, there's tunnels, there's stairs, there's grass, there's different surfaces that invite, inspire, encourage. Ask children to use them in different ways. And as educators, our role is to stand and observe and see how the children respond. Sometimes we might model for them things they could do. Maybe we will extend their ideas. We may do that with, yes, I see that you're putting one hand over the other as you balance going up the ladder. Mirroring what the child is doing is another way to support their learning. And that's talked about in the textbook for this week. But as educators, how do we encourage children to feel safe? How do we invite them to teach each other and to encourage each other to try new things? Thinking about that as our role is really, really important. So another thing that we want to think about is our use of resources. And that's what resources do we as educators put into the environment to extend children's play. So some of these are from the textbook this week. And I want you to think about in the first, when you've been going on your observations, have you seen any of these resources? Have you seen larger pieces of equipment? Have you seen big balls? Have you seen climbing structures? Have you seen swings? Have you seen and things that like that support children to balance, to step on different cushions, using different balls? How have you seen the children use those to develop their proprioception and their vestibular? Now, last week in the tutorial, we talked about the senses, our sense of touch, taste, smell, sight, and what we hear, sound. There's actually two others, and that's our proprioception, which is how we sense the different weights and sense our body. And there's the vestibular, which is giddiness, our core. Like these are very important senses too, and we want to develop children and young people's core. That's why with babies we often give them time on their tummy so that they can develop those core muscles. Thinking about balance beams, have you seen them? That's where children develop their sense of balance, their coordination in climbing up the ladder, their strength in going up a slide. Again, climbing up a slide, balance going down a slide. It's really important as educators that we never put a child on the top of a slide or on the top of a structure, that child learns how to reach the top of that structure on their own independently. And we can guide them by modeling, by showing them, by using our voice. That's it. Hold on, one foot after the other. Feel your foot on each little step. That's how we guide children to use these big structures and materials outside. So other things to think about are spinning, rockers. Do you see little rocking horses where children go back and forth? That again helps their balance, helps their coordination. Row, row, row your boat. And here I'm singing. That supports children's core. All of those things you want to develop in the playground. And just like I showed you before, different tactile experiences, because the different tactile that children can touch, even be it stepping stones or those stepping buckets or those balance beams or big areas that are clear to run in. Each of those different surfaces will encourage the children to use their bodies in different ways. Tunnels. We want children to crawl, to use that crossover motion. A tunnel is a lovely way for children to be enclosed, but to move their bodies in different ways. So you'll see a lot of materials like that when you are at your centres. I've shown you some in the images. Keep thinking about how you would support children to use those bigger resources. How would you show them? Have you crawled through a tunnel recently? Have you sat on a swing? I think it's really important that you give yourself the opportunity to do that so you remember what it's like. If a child is asking you to push them on the swing, how will you support them to hold on? How will you communicate with them when they want to go higher, slower, faster, and to build their capacity to use their momentum to start swinging themselves? Other things that you'll see on the playground, or outside or inside, and I keep saying playground because that's often what we call it, but the outside play areas. You might see smaller things like elastic rings, and they're great for children to practice pulling, to strength, to hold on, gripping. You might see different lycra materials. You might see parachutes. Again, things that children can stretch and move. How you can put on a cape and run around and feel the wind underneath you as you move through the playground. Would lycra on the floor be something that children might start to explore with their hands? Could that be the sea? Could you float the fabric overhead for children to reach and grip and experience? So it's those kinds of things, those kind of push balls that give that lovely sensory feedback. So they're not a hard ball, they're soft and easier to touch. All of us have different preferences. All of us like things to feel differently. So sometimes those push balls with those little rubber threads give children a much more a clearer sense of that object than a hard ball does. Thinking about beanbags, throwing beanbags. You guys were playing with them in the tutorials. How can you use beanbags to balance, to throw, to be used in the environment, to create spaces? Ribbon sticks, again, that hand-eye coordination, and different sensory materials that children can explore, sand, Play-Doh, all of those different resources that you can place in the environment that are open-ended, and be creative about where you put them. Don't always think that you have to put Play-Doh in the arts and craft area. Could you put that in a mud kitchen so the children can pretend to use that to create things? I don't know. It's up to you. So what I would like you to do, but I'm not going to play it now, is for you to watch this video. If I play it, I don't know that I'm going to be able to upload all of this media. But think about music. Think about how music supports movement in the early years. Think not just about your role in providing music. What types of music could you put in the background? Where could you use music to support children in creating the right environment? What kind of mood do you want to create for children? And how will you use music to do that? Also think about the types of music children can make and what materials they can use to make music. Yes, there's musical instruments, but also think about how they can use different objects to make music, to explore sound, to play with rhythm. And as an educator, you want to be very sure that you're using the language, the terminology of music. So beat, rhythm, pitch, soft, loud. What does different music and sound effects contribute to creating playful movement experiences for young children? Is there a fabulous piece of jazz music that you might be able to add to an obstacle course that would motivate children to move through? Would there be a lovely soft classical piece of music that you might use in an environment where you want children to feel, look at the lights above their head and different things? How can you use the sense of sound to support children's music and their movement? The next video I'd like you to watch is this one, and it's again about resources, and you'll hear the educators talk about open-ended materials. So for example, and I know you can't answer me now, but if I showed you perhaps a doll or a car, would you consider those materials to be open-ended? And the answer is not really. Because a doll lends itself to be played with in a certain way. It's a beautiful material or resource to add to a dramatic play area. But with really young children, we want to give them objects and materials that they don't tell them how to use them, but which they can find new ways of using, that they can find new ways of making meaning. So things like in this particular video, they talk about shoelaces. And you see how the children use the shoelaces in so many different ways. And it offers children the opportunity to really use their bodies and all of their senses to make meaning about this particular object. And that if we are attuned to children, and by attunement I mean observing them and looking at what they're doing, we can perhaps bring in other objects to support them in developing their understanding and developing their play. It might be boxes, it might be bowls, it might be something different. Look again in this video and keep thinking about some of the elements that we talked about in this chapter. What surfaces, how do the surfaces in this environment, you see this carpet, it's soft. That's very comfortable for children who are learning to walk. If they're getting their balance, the carpet gives them that right amount of grip, but it's also soft when they take tumbles, because when you're learning to walk for the first time, you will fall down. You will take little steps and then poof. So it's giving children that environment that really suits what they're doing at that age. And that's very important and encourages them and their movement. When we're thinking about inclusive spaces, we're thinking about spaces that are welcoming for all children. And it's very important that every child can participate so that the spaces are accessible physically for all children, but also for children's interests so that they feel a sense of belonging within a space. If we go back to resources, you will see that there's a variety of hats. These hats come from different cultures. You see there is a variety of books. You see there's a picture on the wall. You see there's spaces outside from the canopy where children can work in small groups. And you see that there's spaces for children to work in small groups inside and for a child to work with an educator. So as much as possible, you see that the lighting here is going to be subdued. It won't be bright, bright sunlight because of the canopy. You want to make sure that when you're making spaces for children to move, that the space that we set up really is intentional, that we think about what do we want the children to learn here, and do we provide them with the materials that they need? So if this is a space to explore books, for a place to be outside and relax and share books and play with small groups of friends, are we making sure that we have the materials to do that? Is it comfortable? Is it individualized? If we have a child that really doesn't like sitting on hard wood, but they like something that's cozy and comfortable, do we have a mat there that's going to suit them, or a cushion that they might like to sit on, so that all children can understand the space and feel comfortable within it, so that it's very clear in the messaging that that space is there? Are there many ways to learn here? If this is our literacy area, we've got books, we've got pictures of books, we've got toys to explore that may relate to the literacy. Then we have an educator there. There's lots of visual information that signal and message to children where they can access and play in that environment. So we want our children to feel as though they are reflected in the spaces. So the books here should reflect the interests of the children, the cultures of the children, and the languages of the children. The images around should reflect the cultures of the children, the language of the children, and the interests of the children. And that the materials here are really appropriate for that setting. This is not a big run and jump area. This is an area for more intimate, more quiet, more considered work, because we play in many ways. We don't just play boisterously. We sometimes play in a way that's very contemplative. This might suit a child who prefers to play alone or with one other dear friend or with an educator. So making sure that the area really fosters friendships. And so in doing that, you are going to make sure that your physical environments meet these quality areas. So as much as possible that space has been designed intentionally, that it is a fit for purpose, that it really does suit the needs, and that it's safe, and that everybody can use it, and that it's accessible. So you really want your spaces to be ones that you have acted and created with children, with intention, that values who they are. Think about some of the places where you've been doing your observations, and think about, where do you see them connect with some of the ideas we've talked about today? Did you see surfaces that gave children lots of opportunities to use their bodies in different ways? Did you see resources were inclusive, that were selected with intention? What did you see was the role of the educator? Were they just present, or were they there mirroring and modeling and guiding children? And we will talk about it in our tute. Have a beautiful week.